it does play huge roles in describing the character and circumstances. But really it's there because I love food.
This is the Listening Books Podcast, for every kind of reader, and especially for fans of audiobooks. I'm Jessica Stone, and today I get to offer you a conversation with Claire Fuller, author of Unsettled Ground, now shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. We also talk about a previous novel, Bitter Orange, and how food and music help tell her stories. I think I should really start off by saying congratulations on the launch of Unsettled Ground, and it's making the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. That's quite an entrance.
I'm really delighted. Yeah, of course, absolutely delighted. I've been following that prize, when it was the Bailey's Prize, and before that it was the Orange Prize, for so many years as a reader, and loving all the books that were on the shortlist and the long list, shortlist, and winners. So it's just such an honour to have Unsettled Ground longlisted. It's absolutely wonderful.
Now, from what I understand, you haven't always been a writer. You started off as a sculptor, is that right?
Yeah, well, a long time ago. That was my first degree in sculpture, and I did it for about a year afterwards. But I think it might even be harder to make a living from sculpting than it is from writing books. So, I had to go out and get a sensible job, I guess, in the end. And then I worked in marketing. I ran a small marketing agency for 23 years before I started writing. So, yeah, I didn't start writing till I was 40. Yeah.
Wow. I think that's quite inspiring to all of us. Looking at, I'm talking about me here, looking at our lives and going, what have I done with it?
You can become anything at any age. Absolutely. Put your mind to it and things can change. Yeah.
I wonder, are there skills that help you in sculpting that also help you as a writer?
Well, I don't do so much sculpting anymore because it feels like my creative outlet, my creative urge is satisfied by writing. So the two, I'm not doing both of them at the same time, so they don't have the opportunity even to feed into each other. But I think when I was sculpting, there are some similarities with how I would create. So I don't really plan my novels. I just start writing and I see what happens and I follow whatever route it seems to go. And I did my sculpture in the same way. So I was a stone carver and a wood carver, and I would just start on a piece of stone and see what came out, and if it seemed to be working, I would go that way. And I was, somehow kind of very fluid and very flexible with how I worked.
Mm. Are there satisfactions that are particular to each?
I think when I was sculpting, I enjoyed the process much more than I do when I'm writing.
Oh, really?
It sounds a very odd thing to say, but I don't really like writing, or I find it very, very difficult, especially the first draft when I'm creating the story. What I really enjoy is having written and then being able to do the editing and refining. And the editing, might take me 6 months or longer, and it's layering things in, it's making sure that everything is in the right place and that it all works together. So it's more about kind of the end result somehow in writing, whereas when I was stone carving, I really enjoyed the physicality of it. I loved working with those tools, with my mallet. It was such a beautiful thing. I had this, I still have in the cellar, it just hasn't been taken out for a while, this lignum vitae mallet, which is a really heavy, dense wood. That was for wood carving, really, but, different mallets for stone carving, and my chisels. There was something about the physical process of creation which you don't get from just tapping a keyboard. So I kind of miss that I guess, from writing, but not enough to go and pick up my chisel.
Really?
Yeah. Just don't feel the urge.
And so not enjoying the actual process of writing, but enjoying having written. I mean, was it just because you loved books, you wanted to be able to say that I created one of those? I'm a non-writer is always trying to understand how someone comes to writing, especially if they don't enjoy writing, which I actually think that's quite common. A lot of writers don't enjoy the process and yet still feel the compulsion to do it.
Well, I never intended to be a writer, so it was not something that was on my, wish list at all. It wasn't like I was writing creatively since I was 5 or anything, which lots of writers say they've always wanted to be a writer. Just, I guess, maybe something in my upbringing or the kind of family we were. It was never something that was seen as an aspiration. And so I kind of thought that I didn't understand how books were written. I read them voraciously, but I never really stopped to consider the author and how they were created. Or if I did, I thought that they were created kind of complete. So I didn't understand about editing. This, maybe when I was much younger, I'm talking about. And I didn't understand that books can almost be created in the edits. You can write a very rough, shoddy first draft, and it can kind of turn into something more beautiful by working on those words. So it took me a long time to realise that. And so my first drafts are very rough and not very pretty. But I because I didn't really aspire to being a writer, it really happened by accident, in that my local library was running an event which they called a short story slam. And anyone could sign up to write a short story, and that had to last no longer than 5 minutes when you read it out to the audience. And I was looking for a challenge. I'd been doing various kind of arts projects, challenges, things that were outside of my comfort zone. So I was looking for one of those, really, and it just happened that the next challenge I found was writing. And so I signed up to do this, and I wrote a short story without having any idea what I was doing. And also reading it out to the audience was almost as terrifying. And the audience also could then vote on their winner, on the winner of the evening, and the winner got a share of the door's takings. So I wrote my first story and I read it out, and of course I didn't win, but this event happened every 6 weeks or so. So I signed up for the next one, and I wrote another, and finally, after maybe a year, my story won, and I got a share of the door's takings as my prize, which was something like £9.87. The smallest amount. Anyway, it was my first earnings from writing. And then I decided, having understood that I like having written, I then signed up to do an MA in creative writing at my local university. And my first novel, Our Endless Numbered Days, I wrote on that course. So that's how it happened. There was no plan.
That's wonderful. I'm really struck by just committing to doing that every 6 weeks or so. Were you each time learning to hone it a bit more?
Yeah, I'm sure I was. I think there is something about reading out something you've written to an audience. Writers always say one of their tips is always, as you're writing, to read your work out loud. But if you're just reading it to yourself, sometimes you still don't hear the things that are wrong with it. But when you're reading it out to an audience and you can see their expressions, or their boredom, or their surprise, or their kind of confusion at the end because nothing's happened, or whatever it is, then you get that instant feedback. And so that definitely helped me hone my writing, the fact that I was reading it out, and then also helped me hone my reading aloud skills, I think.
So in our conversation, we're going to talk a little about Unsettled Ground and a little about Bitter Orange. And some of the things that I want to ask you about are common elements in both. So I thought maybe we could start off by just giving a little back of the book blurb about each one, so the listeners who haven't read them yet sort of know, have a basic understanding of what we're talking about. Are you used to summarizing your books by this point? Would you like to?
Yeah, I can. I'm very happy to.
Fantastic.
Yeah, very happy to. The only, and I will do it, but once a book is kind of published and then you move on to the next book, and in fact, I'm writing my 5th book, so I'm 2/3 of the way through the 5th book. So sometimes it's really hard to remember what happens in the previous books because you've moved on to the next one. But I will do my best, certainly for Bitter Orange. I can talk about Unsettled Ground till the cows come home.
I'll pipe up if I feel like anything important is missing.
Yeah, okay. So Bitter Orange is set in 1969, and it's the story of Frances, who is on her deathbed and looking back to 69, to a long hot summer where she worked in the gardens of a dilapidated country house, surveying the architectural landscape there. And the house was empty, and with her were a couple, Cara and Peter. And Cara begins to tell Frances her own story, and Frances becomes obsessed with them, really, and with both these people, and bad things happen.
Yes, and secrets are revealed.
Secrets are revealed, yes. She finds a spy hole in her bathroom floor and she spies on them. She can't resist it, even though she knows what's wrong. She knows what she's doing is wrong, but that wasn't really a very good summing up. But
I thought it was an admirable job. Yeah.
Okay.
And I noticed how nested the stories are. It seemed to me like a Russian doll of stories, that book, and how the revelations were slowly meted out. Once you think, so that's the secret, and then, oh no, there's more. There was a wonderful unspooling of revelations in that book. Yes, so that was Frances Jellicoe. I love that name.
Yes. I think was there a garden designer called Jellicoe? I can't remember now where I got the name from. Possibly. I might be making that up. It's too long ago.
It's a good name. I like it. Yes, and then Unsettled Ground. Do you want to describe that one for us?
Yes. So Unsettled Ground is about twins, Jeannie and Julius, who are 51 and still live with their mother in rural isolation and poverty in Wiltshire. And the book opens with the death of their mother, the unexpected death of Dot, and the twins have been very isolated and lived a very insular life. They don't have any transport. They don't really have technology. The cottage doesn't have indoor plumbing. So they have lived at home looking inward for 51 years. And with the death of Dot, they are suddenly cast out, really, and have to cope with dealing with their neighbours, with their landlord, with trying to find jobs and officialdom, and they don't cope with any of that very well.
And both of these books were narrated by the same reader, Rachel Bavage. Have I said her name correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Rachel Bavage.
Yeah.
Did you have any input on who read your books?
Well, what happens is Penguin send me, because they deal with the audio book, they send me, I think, 3 voices for me to choose from. And, well, certainly with Bitter Orange they did. And then with Unsettled Ground, they said, well, you could have Rachel again, or here are 2 others. But I thought Rachel did a great job. I have only heard snippets of both of them because it's too painful to listen. Or I haven't read either of those books again since they were published.
Oh wow! You're the
So in a
second.
way-
You're the second author who's said that, actually, that they can't bear to listen to the whole.
Because I think I would just find too many things I wanted to change, and that I can obviously no longer change. It just kind of makes me cringe. I don't know. Yeah.
I read that you like to pick music to write to, and that you then listen to that music whenever you're writing that book.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could. I have follow-up questions, but first I wondered if you could talk me through the process of that. How you choose and what that does for you.
Yeah, I start writing and knowing that I will want a soundtrack. Usually I do. And it takes me a little while to find something that's right. And with Bitter Orange, it was Leonard Cohen and a lot of, not all of his music. I did a kind of selection of his more somber songs. Although most of his songs are pretty somber, and listen to those. And there were maybe 20 tracks or so. I don't remember with Bitter Orange that I had to cast around for very long to find anything that seemed right. But for me, it's something about the tone of the music suiting the tone of the book. And also learning, because I'm a terrible procrastinator when it comes to writing. I will do anything else except write. Crazy as that seems. So there's something, I guess it's a kind of CBT thing probably, that I put music on and my body thinks, okay, this is writing time. Now you really have to get down to it, Claire. So having the same music for a whole novel over 2 years will help with that and make me write a little bit harder.
It doesn't make you hate the music?
No, actually, after a while, I almost don't hear it. It's just kind of inside, but not coming through my ears, if that makes sense. Because obviously lots of the music I pick has lyrics, and hearing someone else's words as you're writing your own words, lots of writers say, well, I don't see how does that work, because you've got words coming in your ears and you're writing something different, but I just no longer hear the lyrics. It's just kind of washes over me. It seems to work. I mean, honestly, sometimes it's anything that will help me write.
Something is working for sure. I was surprised to hear you say that it was Leonard Cohen that you were listening to for Bitter Orange, because I was just sure that it was Simon and Garfunkel, because Bookends makes an appearance.
It does, yes. And I do love Simon and Garfunkel, but I don't know. So I think it was too upbeat, a lot of their music. I needed something more somber for Bitter Orange for some reason. But I do love Bookends. And also I think Nick Drake gets a mention, one of his albums. So he was always a possibility, because I listened to a lot of Nick Drake. But no, it was Leonard Cohen. I don't know why.
And then music has even more of a presence in Unsettled Ground, because the characters themselves are musicians and in some ways communicate to each other with their music. Certainly Jeannie communicates to Julius. There's that wonderful scene at the wake where
she almost calls to him.
Yeah, she calls to him, exactly, with her guitar. Right, she plays the guitar and Julius plays the fiddle, and their mother played the banjo and their dad the piano, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously I want to know what you were listening to, but also I want to hear more about why their being musicians was so important to their characters in the story.
Well, it did turn out to be really important, but it wasn't like I planned that either. They just... I was listening to folk music, so maybe I'll start with that. So there was, in the end, I was looking for a long time for Unsettled Ground, for what music would work, and I tried all sorts of things. And in the end, I came down to just 2 tracks. And so I listened to those 2 tracks for 2 years. And that would normally drive someone crazy, but it still didn't. And so the two pieces of music, one was an old English folk song called Polyvorn, and I listened to the version sung by Tia Blake, which people can find on YouTube if they want to have a listen. And then the other was a song that my son wrote, who's an acoustic guitarist, Henry Ailing, called We Roamed Through the Garden. And you can also listen to that on his website. So I was listening to those two bits of music, and maybe because they were only two, they kind of sunk in, and I can't even remember the moment that I decided that Jeannie and Julius would be musicians, but I started writing it, and it seemed so right for the kind of people they are. But I think the music, for me, performs two roles in the novel. So firstly, Jeannie has, for various reasons, struggled with her education, and she is semi-literate, and she left school without any qualifications, as did Julius. And she works in the garden at the back of the cottage where they live, growing vegetables. Julius goes out for a little bit of work, whatever he can find. So I wanted to show that Jeannie especially, was not a stupid person. The education system has failed her, or she's not coped well with it, but she is capable of great learning, and she is incredibly skilled at the guitar, so much so that when she plays and sings, people stop and listen and comment. So that was really important to me. But you're right, also the communication between the twins, that was really important, because they aren't very particularly articulate people. They communicate with each other on a much more kind of fundamental level because they've lived together for 51 years. So it's not really like they have great conversations. So there was that, but also it is quite a dark novel and quite a bleak novel, and difficult things happen to these two characters, and so I needed something that would lift it. And I think the music does that, both for the characters actually and the reader, and also for me while I was writing it, because it's hard to write relentlessly sad things. You kind of need a little bit of lightness, and I hope the music provides that.
You're listening to a conversation with Claire Fuller on the Listening Books podcast. I thought you might like to know that since we recorded this conversation, Claire has created a playlist for Unsettled Ground, which you can find on her website. I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes. If you're enjoying the show, you can help others find us by sharing with a friend or on social media, or even leaving a review. We always love to hear from you. Relevant links, you guessed it, in the show notes. Something else I noticed about both novels was the focal point that the garden has. And probably because I've got my own little seedlings growing at the moment that I'm urging on, and because of the change in seasons and weather, I'm just curious, are you much of a gardener yourself?
I have been in the past. My garden is quite small, and to be honest, at the moment, my husband does a lot of it, but that's just kind of how it's working out at the moment. But in the past, I've had quite large gardens and allotments. I've grown lots of vegetables. I know a little bit about gardens and planting in a very amateur way. My father was always a gardener. My aunt is a gardener. I grew up in the countryside. I live in the town now, but it's important to me, the countryside, the landscape, the land, and gardens and growing. So it was a joy to write all that stuff.
What does it offer you when it comes to storytelling?
Well, I think Jeannie being a gardener was also another way to show that she was skilled. She is a very good gardener. Very capable. But also I think it was about her connection to the land. And that's really important in Unsettled Ground, even from the title. It is all about these people living in this landscape, which is the North Wessex Downs, which is just to the west of Newbury, a big area of chalk downland. And it's how she connects to people. It's the first proper job she gets outside the home. Even when her mother dies and she is grieving her and mourning, she finds her mother's gardening gloves. And if you've been a gardener and you wear those kind of fabric leathery gloves and they get wet and you take them off and they're still in the shape of your hands, kind of clawed. And she finds her mother's gloves and she puts them on as if she is kind of wearing her mother. So all these connections, and eventually the twins have to move to a caravan on a piece of wasteland, and even there Jeannie has to understand the landscape that she's in. She walks the perimeter so that she can have the shape of this little patch of land in her head. Yeah, all of it really important to shaping the character, I think.
Sorry, so many of my questions are like, I really loved this about it. Say more. And I'm afraid that this question is similar in that I loved the way that you write about food in both of these novels and how central food is. The meals that Cara prepares in Bitter Orange that are important on a number of levels.
Yeah.
And, the rabbit pie that Jeannie prepares, and also that's tied to memories that are important to her. And also the way that food is a way of describing the poverty of the characters as well, without continually saying they're poor. So, again, it's barely a question, but would you like to say more about the role that food plays in your writing? And
I guess it's just it does play huge roles in describing the character and circumstances. But really it's there because I love food. And so, nice, good opportunities to write about it. Perhaps less so in Unsettled Ground because they have an abundance of fresh vegetables, but even that, there is at one point where all Jeannie really has are some tomatoes and some radishes, and those make her slightly ill. Because you can't just survive on those. You need protein and some carbohydrates and some fats and all those other kinds of things, which she struggles to get because they don't have the money for it. So, yes, it was absolutely a way of showing what they were going through, and trying to get readers to think about their own circumstances, which, not always, but perhaps a lot of the time are likely to be better circumstances than Jeannie and Julius find themselves in, and to consider what you would do in that situation. So it was partly about trying to get readers to really empathise and put themselves there, because it felt to me that Unsettled Ground is, certainly for me, it was much more removed from my circumstances, very luckily. I always have enough food to eat. I never have to think about where the next meal is coming from in terms of kind of going out and finding it or being able to buy it. Neither of those are real considerations for me. So being able to show that through food was really important, and how little they actually have in the fridge. And when Jeannie, she is homeless for a little while, so what is she going to eat? She takes 2 tins and she eats them on a bit of kind of common land. And I wanted to show the reduction in her circumstances through her food as well. So when they're at home, they eat rabbit pie, which Julius has shot the rabbit, but that is a rich and lovely dish, really, for them. There's pastry and there's other things in it. I think she might put apple in it. That was a recipe I looked up, apple and rabbit pie. And there's some on a low level, there's some abundance, isn't there? And then as their circumstances are decreased or lessened and they go to stay with a friend and she cooks for them. I had great fun with the things that Bridget cooks because she just uses everything out of the freezer, ready meals and out of jars and things. And then, as their availability to food, their access to food is further reduced, she ends up with these 2 tins. So it was a way of absolutely showing what they were going through. And with Bitter Orange, it was really all about showing a kind of hedonism and abundance and drinking all the wine and having all the lovely food, and taking it up onto the roof and having an amazing picnic. And then it all suddenly falls apart, So that was a way of kind of showing that as well. As the picnic is destroyed, so are their lives in a way.
You've been likened to Daphne du Maurier, and I couldn't help but notice some similarities between Rebecca and Bitter Orange. Some echoes, for example, the grand old house and its destruction, the outsider who misunderstands the nature of the other woman, the frame of the story as well, looking back at what happened. Were there elements of Rebecca that you intentionally wanted to play with or subvert?
It wasn't intentional, but I knew I was doing it too, if you see what I mean. It wasn't like, right, I'm, taking these elements from Rebecca and I'm going to apply them to my own novel. But I think I've read Rebecca, several times, and I think I reread it around the time that I was writing Bitter Orange. So, I'm not surprised that elements seeped in. But also I read a lot or reread a lot of those big English house novels. So things like The Remains of the Day, Atonement, Brideshead Revisited.
It's almost a subgenre in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. And I love them. I think it's because I love reading about place. And generally, if a book is set in that kind of house with that kind of landscape, it's well described. It's not something that's just put in there in passing. It's integral to the novel often. So I enjoy reading them. So once I knew that these characters were going to be in a big country house, albeit empty and dilapidated, I read them all, including Rebecca. So, and also I think I had realised at some point as I started writing that this is turning into a kind of gothic novel, or it has some gothic themes. So there's the kind of sexual obsession, there's the spying on people, there's the hot summer, there's the big country house, there's the kind of ghostly elements that all are in there. Sounds like there's an awful lot I put in there, isn't there?
It's still a very different book.
Yes, it is. It's utterly different story, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it was fun to play on all those, and to pick up those and just create little echoes for the reader, for readers who would know Rebecca or any of the others.
I think that's a good time then to segue to you as a reader. And I wanted to ask you first, I noticed on I was reading your blog on your website. I noticed you have a little free library.
I do, yes. Outside my house, my husband built it for me. He's a librarian, but he built me a little library because I get sent a lot of proofs, I get sent a lot of books, and I just can't keep them all. And sometimes they're not particularly to my taste or whatever, but I know that other people would love them, so I put them out there. And then the neighbours come and borrow books and leave books, and I go out every morning to take the little library's register. So it's like being a pretend librarian. It's just such great fun.
I
so really enjoy
lovely.
it.
Well, I wanted to lean on your expertise to get some recommendations for those listeners who might be undertaking our audiobook listening challenge this year, which is a number, it's 10 regular challenges and then 5 turbo challenges for the overachievers among us. And so I picked a couple that I thought you might be especially helpful for. One of the challenges is to listen to a fiction audiobook set during extreme weather. And we've talked a bit about how the heat wave of Bitter Orange was so effective with that novel. I was wondering if you could suggest any other books you've enjoyed that use weather in such an effective way.
Yeah, I did have a little think about this in advance, and I've actually mentioned this in passing, but I think Atonement by Ian McEwan is a really good one. For those who don't know, that I think it might only be the first 5 days or so that are set in a heat wave, and it's about a relationship between a young woman and a young man, Cecilia and Robbie, and somehow that the heat creates an erotic tension in itself. And there's, I think, at the point where Cecilia takes off her dress and she is so hot she goes swimming in the fountain with Robbie watching. And Cecilia's younger sister, Bryony, is the viewer seeing all this happen and misinterpreting it. And so those first days of heat are then gone, and the rest of the novel is very kind of cooler. The long tail of the outcome of what Bryony sees and what she believes she's seen, follows after from that heat wave. I think it's a great book.
That is a wonderful recommendation, and I'd kind of forgotten the element of the heat at the beginning. I sort of remembered the unreliability of what she understands from what she's seen, but I had forgotten that the role that the weather played. So thank you for that recommendation. And then the other one is from our set of turbo challenges, which the one that I've asked you to recommend for, I always feel a little hesitant asking about, because it feels like asking somebody to defend a genre, and I never feel like anybody should have to defend a genre. Anyway, I wonder, for those who think that literary fiction is not for them, do you have any gateway recommendations that might appeal to someone who is looking for more entertainment?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think literary fiction is like all genres. There's a big scale, isn't there? There's one end where it is very literary and sometimes impenetrable and kind of poetic and stream of consciousness or experimental.
Your James Joyce.
Yeah, difficult. But some people like that. I mean, I don't particularly. I prefer perhaps the more the other end of literary fiction, where there is a narrative, where you can. It's much more accessible. There is a story, and yet for me, it ticks a box that says this is really well crafted. It's not just about pace and plot and story and character. It's about what words have been chosen, so that the actual reading experience is beautiful too. You could take a sentence out of it and it's a very well crafted, beautiful sentence, even by itself. But that's not to say all the rest of it isn't important. So my example of a book that kind of is at that end of literary fiction is The Secret History by Donna Tartt.
As you were saying that, as you were describing the lifting a sentence and saying that is a well-crafted sentence, I was like, yeah, like Donna Tartt.
Wow. And I think the Secret History is really well written, but you almost, unless you slow down and read it very slowly or listen to it very slowly, you might not even notice that. But that is kind of the beauty of it. But it also, I think it very definitely is literary fiction because she has really, you can tell she's thought about every word. But it is also actually a crime novel, and it's really propulsive. A crime novel that starts with the crime and gives the crime away at the very beginning, which is also really interesting because you know who's dead and you know who's done it. So the whole story is about when and why and what happened, which is also, I think very, very clever. And I guess it's also a campus novel for anyone who likes those kind of university set novels. I love it. And it's the kind of book that you can definitely read again and again and get lots more from it each time.
Yeah, that is a wonderful recommendation. And I think your books also fit in that that category of being literary, in that obviously the words are chosen with care, it's beautifully crafted, but also that are really rewarding on a baser, humans who love secrets kind of level, We all love the surprise and the reveal. And so I think your books are a great example of that as well. And I hope that people who hear this will open up your books or press play.
Well, I hope so. And I guess that's the kind of book I'm aiming for. A very strong story, but well crafted. That's what I set out to achieve.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning and your thoughtful answers and recommendations. I've got my fingers crossed for you for the shortlist.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Obviously, crossing my fingers worked, as it did make the shortlist. And now we have only to wait until September for the winner. Do check out the Women's Prize shortlists, and long lists for that matter, past and present, if you're looking for your next good read. I'll be back with another bookish conversation next month. In the meantime, we'd love to hear how you're getting on with the Audiobook Listening Challenge. So come find us on social media @ListeningBooks. We'd love to hear from you. The Listening Books podcast is produced by Listening Books, a UK charity that provides an audiobook lending service for over 115,000 members who find that an illness, mental health, physical or learning disability affects their ability to read the printed word or hold a book. It's simple to join. For more information, head to our website www.listening-books.org.uk.